It started in the mud of the Somme and evolved into the most sophisticated armor on the planet. The British didn't just invent the tank, they spent the next century trying to figure out exactly what a tank was supposed to be. From lumbering steel boxes to high-speed aluminum reconnaissance vehicles and unkillable main battle tanks, this is the complete lineage of British armor. We start at the genesis, Little Willie. The prototype of prototypes. It wasn't a combat vehicle, it was a proof of concept, a boiler on tracks that proved you could cross a trench without getting stuck. It led directly to Big Willie, also known as Mother. This was the blueprint, the rhomboid shape, the tracks running over the top. This was the silhouette that changed warfare forever. Then came the Mark I, the first tank in history to see combat. It was hot, loud, and filled with carbon monoxide, but when it rolled over the German wire in 1916, it was alien technology. It came in two flavors, male, armed with naval 6-pounder cannons, and female, packing only machine guns. The family tree expanded quickly and painfully. The Mark II and Mark III were essentially training vehicles made of unhardened steel. The Army, desperate for armor, threw them into combat anyway. German machine gun fire punched right through them, turning the crews into casualties of poor planning. By the time we got to the Mark IV, the British had worked out the kinks. This was the mass-produced icon of World War I. It featured better armor and shorter sponson guns so they wouldn't dig into the mud. This is the tank you see in every documentary. It was followed by the Mark V, a genuine leap forward because it only required one man to drive it. Before this, you needed a committee of 4 people just to change gears without stalling the engine. There were stretched versions like the Mark V and Mark V. Yes, Star and Star. These were elongated specifically to cross the widening anti-tank trenches the Germans were digging. Then came the Mark VII, which tried a complicated hydraulic transmission that was prone to catching fire, and the massive Mark VIII Liberty. The Liberty was an Anglo-American joint venture intended to be the ultimate breakthrough tank, but it arrived too late to see the trenches. We can't forget the Mark IX. It looked like a tank, but it was hollow. It was the world's first armored personnel carrier, designed to carry infantry through the kill zone. The heat inside was so bad the troops usually fainted before they reached the enemy, but the concept was sound. On the lighter side, we had the medium Mark A Whippet. While the heavy tanks smashed the line, the Whippet was designed to race through the gap. It was faster, lighter, and steered by revving 2 separate engines. It was a chaotic nightmare to drive, but effective at running down retreating infantry. The medium Mark B and medium Mark C Hornet followed, refining the design, but the war ended before the Hornet could sting. The interwar period was a strange time. Britain didn't know if the next war would be fought in the desert, the jungle, or the city, so they built a bit of everything. The Vickers medium Mark I and Mark II were the backbone of this confused era. These were the first tanks to standardize the rotating turret. They were tall, boxy, and basically made of sheet metal, but they trained the generation of tankers who would fight Hitler. There was also the Vickers medium Mark III, the 16-tonner. Only 3 were built because they were too expensive, but the triple turret layout looked terrifying. Then came the swarm of Vickers light tanks. From the Mark I through the Mark VI, these were cheap, fast, and armed with machine guns. They were meant for scouting strictly. But when World War II kicked off, the British Army was so short on hardware that they used these little buzzing gnats as frontline battle tanks. The Mark VI famously bounced 37mm shells off its armor, unfortunately, mostly by accident. We also have to mention the Vickers 6-ton. The British Army didn't want it, but Vickers sold it to everyone else. It became the T-26 in Russia and the 7TP in Poland. It was the most influential tank Britain never used. And then, the giants. The A1E1 Independent, a massive multi-turret landship that tried to be a battleship on track. It was a failure, but it tricked the Soviets into building the T-35, wasting their resources for years. When World War II kicked off, British doctrine had split into 2 cults, cruiser tanks for speed and infantry tanks for armor. Let's look at the cruisers first. The Cruiser Mark I, A9, and Cruiser Mark II, A10, were stopgaps, boxy, riveted targets with too many machine gun turrets. But the Cruiser Mark III brought the Christie suspension, the same tech that made the Soviet T-34 famous. It was fast, but the armor was paper-thin. The Cruiser Mark IV added spaced armor to the turret, giving it that distinct angled look. The real star of the North African desert was the cruiser Mark VI Crusader. It looked like a race car, low and sleek. It was faster than anything the Germans had, but it was mechanically fragile. The water pumps leaked and the air filters clogged with sand. Crews hated the maintenance but loved that it could flank the Panzers. The cruiser Mark V Covenanter was a disaster. The radiator was at the front, the engine at the back, and the hot pipes ran through the fighting compartment. It roasted the crew and never left the UK. Later came the Centaur, a Cromwell hull with an underpowered engine, and the Cavalier, another attempt that failed to impress. But the Cromwell, that was the turning point. The cruiser Mark VIII Cromwell was powered by a Meteor engine, essentially a Spitfire V12 without the supercharger. It could hit 40 miles per hour. It was the first British tank that could actually outrun and outmaneuver the German Cats. We stretched the Cromwell to make the Challenger A30, mounting a massive 17-pounder gun to kill Tigers. It looked awkward and tall, but it got the big gun into the fight. The pinnacle of the cruiser line was the Comet. Arriving late in the war, it fixed everything. It had a specialized 77mm high-velocity gun, good armor, and the Meteor engine. Many veterans argue it was the best British tank of the war, finally bridging the gap to the modern era. Now, the infantry tanks, the heavy hitters. The Matilda one was a joke, a tiny two-man box with a machine gun and a cheap Ford engine. But the Matilda II, that was the queen of the desert. At the start of the war, its armor was so thick that German anti-tank guns just pinged off it. It terrified Rommel's forces at Arras. The Valentine was the workhorse, reliable, small, and built on a budget. It wasn't flashy, but more Valentines were built than any other British tank. It just worked. Then came the Churchill, the infantry tank Mark IV. It looked like a throwback to WWI with its long tracks, but that was the point. It could climb hills and cross mud that stopped other tanks cold. It was slow and heavy, but it could take an absolute beating. From the beaches of Dieppe to the hills of Korea, the Churchill was a moving fortress. We also had the oddballs. The Tetrarch and Harry Hopkins were light tanks designed to be flown in gliders. The Tetrarch actually landed on D-Day, driving out of giant Hamilcar gliders to support the paratroopers. Then, the monsters that never quite made it, the TOG-1 and TOG-2, the old gang. These were designed by the same men who built the WWI tanks, and it showed. They were incredibly long, designed to cross trenches that no longer existed. The TOG-2 still sits in Bovington, a massive, slow monument to obsolete thinking. The A-33 Excelsior and A-38 Valiant were attempts to replace the heavy tanks. The Valiant is legendary for being perhaps the worst tank ever made. The driver's levers were mounted backwards, and the foot pedals could trap and break your ankle if you hit a bump. The A-39 Tortoise wasn't a tank, but a super heavy assault gun. 79 tons of steel with a 32-pounder gun. It was designed to smash the Siegfried Line fortifications, but the war ended before it could crawl there. The Black Prince was a widened Churchill carrying a 17-pounder, a great idea that arrived too late. Britain also built specialized tank destroyers. The Archer was a Valentine with a massive 17-pounder gun mounted backward. You had to park the tank with its rear to the enemy to fire, which actually made it great for shoot and scoot ambushes. The Bishop was a 25-pounder field gun welded onto a Valentine chassis. A desperate measure, the Avenger was a Cromwell with a lighter open-top turret built for speed and firepower. After the war, Britain realized the split between cruiser and infantry tanks was stupid. They needed one tank to do it all, the main battle tank. Enter the Centurion, arguably the greatest tank design in history. It arrived just as World War II ended, but it defined the Cold War. It had the mobility of a cruiser and the armor of an infantry tank. From the 20-pounder gun to the legendary L7 105mm, the Centurion could kill anything. The Israelis used them to devastating effect in the Golan Heights. But the Soviets were building heavy armor like the IS-3, so Britain built the Conqueror, a massive heavy tank with a 120mm gun. It was a sniper designed to sit back and pop Soviet heavies from long range. It was followed by the Interim Conway, a tall turret on a Centurion hull, and the Charioteer, a Cromwell hull given a massive gun for the Territorial Army. We can't forget the FV-4005, a barn-sized turret on a Centurion hull with a 183mm gun. It was designed to shatter a Soviet tank with a single massive Hesh shell. It looked ridiculous. and the recoil was terrifying. Then came the Chieftain. If the Centurion was the universal soldier, the Chieftain was the brawler. It introduced the reclining driver position to slope the armor back steeper than ever before. It carried the 120mm rifled gun, the most accurate tank gun of its era. The engine was a multi-fuel disaster that broke down if you looked at it wrong, but if it was running, it was the king of the battlefield. For the export market, Britain built the Vickers MBT. Known as the Vijayanta in India, it was a cheaper, lighter Centurion alternative that saw plenty of action in the Indo-Pakistani wars. On the lighter side, the Cold War produced the CVRT series, the FV-101 Scorpion and FV-107 Scimitar. These weren't steel, they were aluminum armor powered by Jaguar car engines. The Scorpion holds the world record for the fastest production tank. They were small enough to fit in transport planes and fought effectively in the Falklands. The series included the Stryker missile carrier and the Sabre, a hybrid Frankentank. There were prototypes that laid the groundwork for the future. The FV-4202 tested the Chieftain concepts. The MBT-80 was the super tank that got canceled, but its technology bled into the next generation, and that leads us to the modern era, the age of composite armor. The Challenger 1. It was the first to use Chobham armor operationally, a secret matrix of ceramics and steel that shattered heat rounds. In Desert Storm, a Challenger 1 scored the longest tank-on-tank kill in history, sniping an Iraqi tank from over 5 kilometers away. This evolved into the Challenger 2, the current fist of the British Army. Armed with the L-30A1 rifled gun, it is one of the most heavily protected vehicles on Earth. During the invasion of Iraq, one Challenger 2 was hit by 14 RPGs and a Milan anti-tank missile, and the crew just drove it home. It uses Dorchester armor, a mostly classified upgrade to Chobham that makes it nearly impervious to handheld weapons. And finally, the Challenger 3, currently in the works. It takes the unkillable hull of the Challenger 2 and finally fits it with a smoothbore NATO standard gun and digitized turret. From the rattling metal box of Little Willie to the digital fortress of the Challenger 3, Britain has built some of the worst tanks in history and some of the absolute best. They invented the game, and for over 100 years, they've been rewriting the rules.